Bootcamp. Happy to have everybody on the webinar with us today. We're really excited about today's topic, leveraging INZone as a trade partner. Really great resource for exporting, importing companies here in our metro. I'm Ashley Elrod, Program Director for Economic Development at the Indy Chamber. And a quick intro and housekeeping items. We've developed this Export Bootcamp webinar series as a resource for businesses like yours as you start to navigate the waters around exporting. And so we've designed these topics around pretty basic information on opportunities and basics like sales that we've done in the past. And today's topic of INZone, which is a great resource. This is all part of the Indy Chamber suite of services dedicated to helping business grow. More information about what we can help you with, whether you're exporting or you're an entrepreneur starting your business, you can visit the Indy Chamber's website. Specifically, our international resources are located at indychamber.com/globalindy. And just wanted to pull out one of our resources available to exporting companies is our Go Global grant. This is a partnership with JP Chase that provides exporting companies up to $5,000 to support export-related activities such as a trade show attendance, sales visits overseas, things like that. Our upcoming deadline for the next round of grants is September 1st, so please visit indychamber.com/globalindy for more information on that. Also want to take a second to recognize our wonderful sponsors. Today's webinar is brought to you by our partners at FedEx. We, of course, thank them for their support and recognition of our Global Indy programs. And without, I won't go into too much detail into Andrew. Andrew will go into more detail about what INZone does, but Andrew is the operations manager for Greater Indianapolis Foreign Trade Zone. And he has a BA in International Studies from St. Louis University in Madrid. And is a candidate for an MBA with a concentration in international business from Butler University. His career has included administration, program development and management, market research, marketing and business development, and organization management. So we're fortunate to have Andrew with us today. Real quickly, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please email communications@indychamber.com and they will help you anytime during the presentation. Also, we do have a chat window in the corner of your screen. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we will leave it up to Andrew to either answer them on the spot, or we have allotted some time toward the end of today's webinar for us to address those directly. Typed questions which are not answered during the allotted time will definitely get some direct email feedback after the webinar. And we will post this webinar and a log of all of the questions and answers on our resource page at indychamber.com/globalindy. So without further ado, I'll welcome Andrew to join the conversation.
Thank you, Ashley. Greater Indianapolis Foreign Trade Zone, we are super happy to be a partner with the Indy Chamber in this webinar series, and very excited to be here today to talk to you about the Foreign Trade Zone program and what we do at INZone. Like Ashley said, there is a chat function available, so if you have questions, I'll try to keep an eye out for those. If they're pertinent to what we're talking about at the moment, I'll try to be answering those as we go through the webinar. If they're more of a general question, we'll probably just hold those until the end for the open Q&A session, and I'll get those answered. Like Ashley said, if there's anything that we can't get answered or fit into the time that we're allotted today, we'll definitely make sure to email you a much more detailed response later on, and then we'll have all of those posted as well as resources. So without further ado, we will go into the presentation here. Like she said, my name is Andrew Crecilius. I am the Operations Manager for Greater Indianapolis Foreign Trade Zone, which for short, because that is a mouthful, we go by INZone. It's much faster conversations that way. So let's jump right into it here. I think before we really talk about who INZone is, we kind of need to know what the heck a foreign trade zone is. So I think many of you, we have a lot of people participating today who come from very diverse backgrounds. Many of you might have heard in the news or somewhere else free trade zones. You might have heard that term used. And free trade zones are used all over the world. They're specially designated areas. They're usually controlled by the nation's legislation, and they can receive goods, handle them, manufacture it. It's kind of all designated by that particular country's legislation. So, but free trade zones is kind of the term that's used all over the rest of the world. As you know, the United States likes to be different. So, in the Foreign Trade Zones Act of 1934, we established a similar concept here in the United States, and we decided instead of calling it the free trade zones, we're going to call it foreign trade zones. And they can be created separate from a sort of national foreign trade zone, uniquely local by an organization such as a city, county, port authority, and all they have to do is make an application to apply for a grant of authority to establish or operate the zone. And that's kind of what we do, as you'll learn a little bit later in the presentation. So, foreign trade zone can also be confusing, so just a real quick getting the terminology right session here. As you can see, foreign trade zone, all capital with a hyphen, is used kind of to specify the program overall in a general sense. It is the federal program that allows companies to use special procedures to gain benefits related to the import-export of products. Foreign trade zone without the hyphen is generally the administrative or service area covered, as well as the grantee or administrating organization, which in Central Indiana is us, INZone, and we're also referred to in a lot of boring legal documents as FTZ number 72. Foreign trade zone in lowercase, as you can see there, is generally used to specify the specific physical site, whether subzone or usage driven, that a business can designate as its own facilities. And I know this seems like a lot of semantics here, but it's important because I think when we get into the weeds a little bit, it can get really confusing when you hear foreign trade zone and you don't know which one I'm talking about. But having this in context can kind of help separate out whether we're talking about an overview federal program, we're talking about us as the administrator, or we're talking about something specifically on site with a company. So us specifically, the Greater Indianapolis Foreign Trade Zone, Inc., or INZone, we are the administrator of the Federal Foreign Trade Zone program for all of Central Indiana, and that covers 41 counties. And we do that on behalf of the Indianapolis Airport Authority, who is the actual grantee. And what that means is that the Indianapolis Airport Authority received the grant of authority to operate the program in Central Indiana, but they wanted to keep it separate from business that's related to the airport. So we were spun off. As you can see, there's a 501c6 nonprofit, and we are required to operate under federal legislation as a public utility. That all happened in 1981, so we've been around for quite a while. And we have a mission to foster business growth for companies located in our service area. Sounds pretty general, but we're going to get into the specifics. As you can see here, there are 6 service areas or 6 administrative districts in all of Indiana. We're the giant yellow district, FTZ 72, as I said before, covers 41 counties. If anyone who's participating today has territory or business in any of the other areas, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to introduce you to the administrator for those respective areas as well. The program as a whole, as I mentioned before, is a federal program, so it doesn't matter if you're in our service area or any of those other service areas or anywhere else in the United States. The program and its benefits are going to be exactly the same for you. The only difference is the wonderful customer service that you experience when you're within our service area. Because we are solely dedicated to the Foreign Trade Zone program, we're able to answer questions, do a number of different things that we'll talk about a little bit further in the presentation, besides just administering the program itself. So as you can see here, we're going to get into a little bit of the program sort of details. The program was is kind of two branches of federal government. The U.S. Department of Commerce is kind of the overseer, the creator, the instigator, if you will, in some cases, and they have a U.S. Foreign Trade Zone board that is designated to kind of oversee the program in the United States. The enforcer comes from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security through the U.S. Customs and Border Protection branch. So those two hands together kind of hold up the grantee, which is the Indianapolis Airport Authority, who has designated us as that body to kind of run the program on their behalf, cooperating with both of those branches of federal government. For the operators, you can be a subzone or you can be a usage-driven site. And we're actually not going to go into the specifics of those two differences today, because that's really getting into the weeds, and I don't know that it's necessarily beneficial for you to do that. But if you have specific questions, you can hit them on the chat there, or you can email those a little bit later. We'll definitely have my contact information, or you can email those directly to the chamber, and Ashley can get those questions over to us, and we can get those answered for you. But essentially, we grant the authority for someone to become an operator, and then that operator, especially in the case of usage-driven sites, can then further market that service to end users. So in addition to using the program for a company's own benefit internally, a company can then turn around and market the program and gain some return on investment through end users. So how does the Foreign Trade Zone program work? In general, the program is designed to be an economic incentives program that's trying to enhance foreign trade and make companies a little bit more competitive in the global sphere, in the global market. And that is primarily focused on imports, but there are a lot of export-specific benefits that are related. So you can kind of think of this program as a way to enhance your sort of overall import-export experience as a company. There are over 300 unique benefits, very specific benefits for companies, but it'll depend on the needs of an individual company. Obviously, every company is different, and so the benefits that one company is going to receive out of the program is probably going to be different than another company. You know, a manufacturer is different than a distributor. You know, third-party logistics are able to market the program in a way that, you know, maybe a big box pharmaceutical company can't or doesn't want to. So let's look at some of just the top benefits today. And if you want to get into some of the specifics about some of the other 300 plus benefits, I would be more than happy to dig into the weeds, but I don't know that everybody who's on the webinar today wants to hear all of those. So I hope you like this abstract art that I've created for you today. One of the top benefits, especially with respect to exports, is going to be duty elimination. Duty elimination means, as you can see in our little graphic, if you're a company and you have an FTZ, we'll say the FTZ is this purple circle in the middle, and you bring a product from China. Okay, this can be raw materials or it can be some sort of good, and you're bringing that red product in, and you're going to combine it maybe with a US-based material in green, and you combine those two together. In combining them, you're going to change the tax code because it becomes a new product. So it doesn't necessarily have to be full-blown manufacturing, but it can be, and in most cases it is. So you're combining those products into one, and then you're going to export that product to Brazil. In doing so, because you utilize the Foreign Trade Zone to receive and host that, that product creation within the United States, and because it does not actually enter the US market, you're exporting it right back out to Brazil, you will actually pay no duties on that red product that you brought in. So that's a really, really key component of the program, and is probably the way in which companies are able to reap the most benefit because they completely eliminate their duty by using the Foreign Trade Zone to receive, manipulate, manufacture, and then export directly from the Foreign Trade Zone. Because when you create a Foreign Trade Zone at your facility or at your client's facilities, for some of you who are service providers, essentially what you're doing is you're saying, we're designating this area to be outside of US Customs so that we can retain our operations here in the United States, but still reap the benefits, the tax benefits, as if we had moved our operations abroad. And so that's kind of the concept of the Foreign Trade Zone program. So a related concept is going to be duty deferral, one of the major benefits of the program. Duty deferral, if you think of it, is just a way of freeing up some of your cash. What you're doing is you're bringing in, let's say, a bulk order of this red product. You're bringing it in from China. You receive it into the foreign trade zone, and you wanted to order bulk because you got a special rate, right? And you know, if you buy 10 times as much, they're going to give you 10 times as much of a discount. So you definitely wanted to buy bulk. Thing is, you don't know when or how much your customers are going to order from you. So it's kind of risky for you to take on that strategy. However, if you were in a foreign trade zone, or if you were operating a foreign trade zone, you would be able to receive all of those goods duty-free, as long as they're housed in the foreign trade zone. And then as your customer orders, you're able to send out only the quantity that they're ordering, and you're only paying the customs duties on those products that are being sent out into the US market. And then referring back to our previous slide, if those customer orders are coming from abroad and you're sending those products abroad, or finished products abroad, you are not paying any duties on those products. So definitely a major savings. Now we're starting to get a little bit more complicated. In a simple explanation, duty reduction is going to be, let's say that you have a number of different raw materials that are coming in from a number of different countries, and they have very different tax rates. You're combining those products together into one final product using your foreign trade zone, and then you're going to introduce that into the US market. Okay? So what you get to do with the foreign trade zone program is you actually get to select a much lower tax rate than if you had just brought in the goods individually, combined them, or if you had brought in the finished product that had been produced elsewhere and introduced it into the US market. You're actually going to be able to choose that lower rate. So let's say that, for example, the yellow product being received from Germany is going to have a low tax rate, whereas the raw good that you're bringing in from China has a really high tax rate. Well, when you combine them all together with maybe a US component, you can predetermine with Customs and Border Protection that you're, instead of paying, you know, the really expensive final product rate or the really expensive Chinese good rate, you're going to pay that lower German good rate. And they will allow you to do that through the Foreign Trade Zone program only. And I did have some actual numbers. I know that some of you probably like numbers. So going back, sorry, I meant to do this earlier, but if you look at the example of the elimination of duties, let's say, just real quick here, if you had a motor vacuum, a motor for a vacuum, and your duty rate was 4%, sorry, it's 4%, so let's say it's a $46 motor, 4% of that is $1.84. So if you have 250,000 units that you're producing, that's $460,000 that you're paying in duty. Let's say that if you're exporting that, it's pretty easy math here, you're eliminating all of that, so you're not paying any duties. So that $460,000 goes down to zero. Okay, so that seems like a pretty simple math equation there. And if you guys want to see some other specifics, I don't want to make this webinar too long or go too deep in the woods. So if you like that math example and you want to see more of those, let me know and I can go back and I can do them for some of the other benefits that we were talking about. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here because I know some of you, it's not relevant to what you do, your service providers as well. So just let me know on the chat or with email later and we can go into those. One of the other really big benefits is merchandise processing fees. So anytime there's a good received at the port of entry, whether it's something that you've sent out and then it got returned to you, if you're exporting currently and there's a problem with your product and it has to come back into the United States, just because you sent it out and you're receiving it back doesn't mean you don't have to pay import duties on your own good that's being returned to you. So that can make the cost of return goods very, very expensive. So merchandise processing fees helps with the original receipt of imported goods or materials, in the sense that every time a sea container, those giant containers that you see on ships that are used to bring goods into the United States, um, every time one of those containers comes through, there is a merchandise processing fee that is charged for that good. So if you're a company, or if you serve companies that have maybe 100 shipments one week, 50 shipments another week, 20 shipments, that can really add up. Under the Foreign Trade Zone program, the maximum amount that they'll charge for an entry is $485, whereas outside of the Foreign Trade Zone program, it's set based off the value of goods, the quantity, the weight, etc. So this really helps improve your planning and budgeting, because you know what the maximum amount is going to be. In addition, you can request weekly entry, which means you'll tell customs in advance, hey, we know that next week we're going to get 100 shipments, 100 sea containers. And then on that Friday of that week, you just report back to customs, hey, we received all 100 containers. Instead of paying 100 times $485, right, you're just going to pay the one $485 weekly entry fee for all 100 containers. Okay, and that's really great because, once again, for planning, you can budget out, hey, I know that I'm going to receive shipments. I receive shipments every single week. Well, you know that there are 52 weeks in the year, so you know the maximum amount that you're going to be paying for those entries. And that's only available under the Foreign Trade Zone program. So another great benefit. One that, as I mentioned already, is very, very pertinent to individuals who are already exporting is going to be the simplified returns benefit. And that's, if you're exporting currently, even if you're not importing, but if you're exporting, you will be sending your goods all over the world. Well, what happens when a customer has a problem with one of those goods or is not satisfied with the good? Obviously, you want to provide the best customer service available to your customers. So you're going to say, well, sure, send that back. We'll make it right, or we'll look into it. We'll investigate it. Well, as I mentioned, when they send those goods back, you have to receive them as if they were imports. So you're going to pay import duties on those. So under the Foreign Trade Zone program, you are able to receive those return goods in a foreign trade zone at your facility, inspect them, figure out what's wrong, correct it so you can improve it. You can fix what's wrong with the product, and then you can send it back out as an export again, without having ever paid any sort of duties for having received that good and then sending it back out. So that's definitely a huge benefit for companies, even companies that aren't importing anything at all. If you're exporting, it's a huge benefit to you, because it allows you to improve that customer service with your end user or your client. So information on how to participate. Before I do that, we do have a question here from someone. It says, are there goods, products, materials not permitted in zones? And that's a very good question. There are any good that is prohibited by law, obviously, is not going to be allowed into the foreign trade zone. Just because it's outside of U.S. Customs territory does not mean that it does not have to abide by U.S. Laws. So foreign trade zones are under the supervision of Customs and Border Protection, and they are prohibited from any good or material that is prohibited from entering the United States is going to be prohibited from entering a foreign trade zone. So just keep that in mind. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, then you can definitely follow up with another question on the chat here. While we're waiting on that, how do I participate? There's never too much information, right? When you're exploring the Foreign Trade Zone program. As I mentioned, there are 300 plus benefits that could be utilized by a company depending on what that company does. Are they importing, not importing? What are they importing? How much of it? What are they doing with it? Are they just manufacturing it? Are they distributing it? Are they a distribution company and they just want to take on this program? Are they wanting to market it to end users who might be importers or exporters? So definitely, I would say do your due diligence and get as much information as you can, and that's what we're here to help with. We can do one-on-one or group presentations at your company or with groups that you have set up. We also help cover the cost of feasibility studies if a company wants to dig a little bit deeper. And we have a list of vetted FTZ consultants that we would connect you with. And the reason that we would connect you with a consultant is because ultimately you do have to apply through us. So we try to connect you to the information, but we try to be a little bit removed from the actual process, just because we feel like that's the ethical way to do that. You definitely want to decide whether you want to be an operator or a user. An operator, you're running it, and so you have all the responsibilities of running a foreign trade zone program. But you can also be a user if you feel like you're smaller, or maybe you are just doing exporting. So there's not a whole lot of import components into your import-export operations, and you don't want to incur the cost or, like I said, responsibility of running the program. You could definitely connect with someone who's already an operator, and you could get a quote, request a quote for rates to be able to access the benefits for example, that simplified returns process or any of the other export-specific or export-exclusive benefits out of the Foreign Trade Zone program. Like I said, you would have to apply through us, and it's as simple as just sending us a letter expressing your intent, and then we would guide you through the rest of the steps, which would include an application to the U.S. Foreign Trade Zone Board in D.C., and then activation would actually be managed by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They'll come out and talk to you about security measures, and they'll give you the final stamp of approval to move forward in participation with the program. So, additional questions. It looks like we do have one here, pointing out that a lot of the examples are related to imports of raw materials. Are there implications for U.S.-made products that are exported? So like I said, there are 300 plus very, very specific benefits for companies. I tried to pick the ones that indicate the largest savings. And I know that we have a lot of people on the webinar today that are doing both imports and exports, as well as service providers to importers and exporters. So I tried to use examples of both. There are other examples that are exclusively related to exports. And I'd be happy to speak with anyone who wants to give me more information about their company, because they are kind of very specific to what your company is doing or not doing. So the largest savings would definitely be the simplified return that we talked about, as well as the elimination of duties. The elimination of duties, you don't have to be importing a lot of products. If you even have just one tiny product that has a duty rate, and you're combining it with 16 other components that are U.S. based or U.S. made components, that's still a duty that you're going to have to pay, and you're more than welcome to combine those in a foreign trade zone and export them out. So for the individual that asked the question about the example specific to exports, I'd really have to know more about the company, and we can kind of craft that. So that's one that we can definitely follow up by email and kind of dig a little bit deeper into for the company, but they are available. Like I said, the program is very general in its scope, and so the benefits that are actually reaped by the companies are going to depend a lot on who the company is, what they're doing, what sort of products they're moving around, and what the ultimate destination of those products are. We do have another question here about fees or costs associated with the program. Of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I think we all know that from economics. The fees that are associated with the program, we have established, as the administrator, a zone schedule. We were required by law to establish a zone schedule, and that specifies all of our fees. That is available at the U.S. Foreign Trade Zone's website. We were required, again, by law to publish that. All Foreign Trade Zone grantees and administrators are required by law to publish their fee schedule. The way that we crafted our fees are going to be based off the actual square footage of active FTZ space within your facility. So if you're really small, mom and pop shop, you're going to pay a much different rate than a very large client that might have 2 million plus square feet activated in central Indiana. They're going to pay a much higher rate than the mom and pop shop, and that's different than some of the other administrators in the United States. A lot of them just do a flat fee, which means that everybody's paying the same. And when we crafted ours, we wanted to give the smaller companies an opportunity to participate in the program and reap a same value as some of the larger companies. So the fees range anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 per month. And I know that that sounds expensive, especially for some of the smaller companies, but I think once you crunch numbers related to the amount of duties that are saved, or the amount of fees that are saved, or the simplification in paperwork and the administrative costs that are saved through that, we have customers that are saving millions of dollars from the program. So if they weren't, we wouldn't be here. I think the program would have been discontinued a long time ago. We're definitely happy to explore some of those cost benefits with individuals that are interested, as well as connect them to an FTZ consultant if they want someone to actually come out and crunch numbers for them, and give them sort of a cost benefit analysis, a feasibility study of what they should do if they wanted to approach this program. So hope that answered the question. Are there any other questions? I will say really quickly that we are also available as a resource in general related to trade. We have access to data on imports and exports in Indiana, in central Indiana, in all of Indiana, as well as all of the United States. We do field a lot of requests from our economic development partners, as well as specific companies that are looking to do business or develop their business here in central Indiana. And we are happy to field those requests and connect you to whatever trade resources we can. Again, we primarily do a lot of data monitoring and reporting, and so we're happy to provide information on that as well. So if you do have some questions about imports, exports, actual data for Indiana, definitely reach out to us. We'd be happy to field that. So if there aren't any other questions, I definitely want to thank everyone for participating today. You can see my contact information on the screen. If you do have any questions, shoot me an email. We are also on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @INFTZ, so you can get some updates there. You can find our company page on LinkedIn as well. So there are lots of ways to get connected and get your questions answered.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it. This was really good insight. And just a quick reminder that this webinar, recorded webinar, and the question and answer will be posted on our website at indychamber.com/globalindy. And we'll make sure to reach out to you as well with a follow-up email and survey. So as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is part of our Export Bootcamp series, and we'll make sure to include you on future communications about our webinars remaining this year and into 2017. Thank you again to FedEx for their support of this webinar. And I wanted to bring up our next Global Indy event, which will be Monday, October 31st at Butler University, which will feature Tom Linebarger, Chairman and CEO of Cummins, addressing the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the benefits of supporting such a legislation. So please go to indychamber.com events if you would like to register for that today. You'll also get some information in our follow-up email. Again, thank you so much for your time today, and any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.